Section 14 of Beacon Lights of History, Volume 2, Jewish Heroes and Prophets, by John Lord. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by K. Hand. Elijah, Part 2. The representatives of the whole nation are now assembled at Mount Carmel with their idolatrous priests. The prophet appears in their midst as a preacher armed with irresistible power. He addresses the people, who seemed to have no firm convictions, but were swayed to and fro by changing circumstances, being not yet hopelessly sunk into the idolatry of their rulers. "How long," cried the preacher, with a loud voice and fierce aspect, "halt ye between two opinions? If Jehovah be God, follow him; but if Baal be God, then follow him." The undecided, crestfallen, intimidated people did not answer a word. Then Elijah stoops to argument. He reminds the people, among whom probably were many influential men, that he stood alone in opposition to the 850 idolatrous priests protected by the king and queen. He proposes to test their claims in comparison with his as ministers of the true God. This seems reasonable, and the king makes no objection. The test is to be supernatural, even to bring down fire from heaven to consume the sacrificial bullock on the altar. The priests of Baal select their bullock, cut it into pieces, put it on the wood, and invoke their supreme deity to send fire to consume the sacrifice. With all their arts and incantations and magical sorceries, the fire does not descend. They then perform their wild and fantastic dances, screaming aloud from early morning to noon, "O Baal, hear us!" We do not read whether Ahab was present or not, but if he were, he must have quaked with blended sentiments of curiosity and fear. His anxiety must have been terrible. Elijah alone is calm, but he is also stern. He mocks them with provoking irony, and ridicules their want of success. His grim sarcasms become more and more bitter. "Cry with a loud voice," said he, "yea, louder and yet louder, for ye cry to a god. Either he is talking, or he is hunting, or he is on a journey, or peradventure he sleepeth and must be awakened." And they cried aloud and cut themselves, after their manner, with knives and spears, till the blood gushed out upon them. Then Elijah, when midday was past, and the priests continued to call unto their God until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, and there was neither voice nor answer, assembled the people around him, as he stood alone by the ruins of an ancient altar. With his own hands he gathered 12 stones, piled them together to represent the 12 tribes, cut a bullock into pieces, laid it on the wood, made a trench around the rude altar, which he filled with water from an adjacent well, and then offered up this prayer to the God of his fathers: "O Jehovah, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, hear me, and let all the people know that thou art the God of Israel, and that I am thy servant, and that I have done all these things at thy word. Hear me, Jehovah, hear me, that this people may know that thou, Jehovah, art God, and that thou hast turned their hearts back again." Then immediately the fire of Jehovah fell and consumed the bullock and the wood, and even melted the very stones, and licked up the water in the trench. And when the people saw it, they fell on their faces, and cried aloud, "Jehovah, he is the God! Jehovah, he is the God!" Elijah then commanded to take the prophets of Baal, all of them, so that not even one of them should escape. And they took them, by the direction of Elijah, down the mountainside to the brook Kishon, and slew them there. His triumph was complete. He had asserted the majesty and proved the power of Jehovah. The prophet then turned to the king, who seems to have been completely subjected by this tremendous proof of the prophetic authority, and said, "Get thee up, eat and drink, for there is the sound of abundance of rain." And Ahab ascended the hill to eat and drink with his nobles at the sacrificial feast, a venerable symbol by which, from the most primitive antiquity to our own day, by so universal an impulse that it would seem to be divinely imparted, every form of religion known to man has sought to typify the human desire to commune with Deity. Elijah also went to the top of Carmel, not to the symbolic feast, but in spirit and in truth to commune with God, reverentially hiding his face between his knees. He felt the approach of the coming storm, even when the sky was clear and not a cloud was to be seen over the blue waters of the Mediterranean. So he said to his servant, "Go up now and look toward the sea." And the servant went to still higher ground and looked, and reported that nothing was to be seen. 6 times the order was impatiently repeated and obeyed, but at the 7th time the youthful servant, as some think, the very boy he had saved, reported a cloud on the distant horizon, no bigger seemingly than a man's hand. At once Elijah sent word to Ahab to prepare for the coming tempest, and both he and the king began to descend the hill, for the clouds rapidly gathered in the heavens, and that mighty wind arose which in eastern countries precedes a furious storm. With incredible rapidity the tempest spread, and the king hastened for his life to his chariot at the foot of the hill, to cross the brook before it became a flood. And Elijah, remembering that he was king, ran before his chariot more rapidly than the Arab steeds. As the servant of Jehovah, he performs his mission with dignity and without fear; as a subject, he renders due respect to rank and power. Ahab has now witnessed with his own eyes the impotency of the prophets of Baal, and the marvelous power of the messenger of Jehovah. The desire of the nation was to be gratified, the rains were falling, the cisterns and reservoirs were filling, and the fields once more would soon rejoice in their wonted beauty, and the famine would soon be at an end. In view of the great deliverance, and awe stricken by the supernatural gifts of the prophet, one would suppose that the king would have taken Elijah to his confidence and loaded him with favors, and been guided by his counsels. But no. He had been subjected to deep humiliation before his own people, his religion had been brought into contempt, and he was afraid of his cruel and inexorable wife, who had incited him to debasing idolatries. So he hastens to his palace in Jezreel, and acquaints Jezebel of the wonderful things he has seen, which he could not prevent. She was transported with fury and vengeance, and vowing a tremendous oath, she sent a messenger to the prophet with these terrible words: "As surely as thou art Elijah, and I am Jezebel, so may God do to me and more also, if I make not thy life to morrow about this time as the life of one of them." In her unbounded rage she forgot all policy, for she should have struck the blow without giving her enemy time to escape. It may also be noted that she is no atheist, but believes in God according to Phoenician notions. She reflects that 850 of Baal's prophets had been slain, and that the nation might return their allegiance to the God of their fathers, who had wrought the greatest calamity her proud heart could endure. Unlike her husband, she knows no fear, and is as unscrupulous as she is fanatical. Elijah, she resolved, should surely die. And how did the prophet receive her message? He had not feared to encounter Ahab and all the priests of Baal, yet he quailed before the wrath of this terrible woman, this incarnate fiend who cared neither for Jehovah nor his prophet. Even such a hero as Elijah felt that he must now flee for his life, and, attended only by his boy servant, he did not halt until he had crossed the kingdom of Judah and reached the utmost southern bounds of the Holy Land. At Beersheba he left his faithful attendant and sought refuge in the desert, the ancient wilderness of Sinai with its rocky wastes. Under the shade of a solitary tree, exhausted and faint, he lay down to die. "It is enough, O Jehovah! Now take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." He had outstripped all pursuers, and was apparently safe, yet he wished to die. It was the reaction of a mighty excitement, the lassitude produced by a rapid and weary flight. He was physically exhausted, and with this exhaustion came despondency. He was a strong man unnerved, and his will succumbed to unspeakable weariness. He lay down and slept, and when he awoke he was fed and comforted by an angelic visitor, who commanded him to arise and penetrate still further into the dreary wilderness. For 40 days and nights he journeyed, until he reached the awful solitudes of Sinai and Horeb, and sought shelter in a cave. Enclosed between granite rocks, he entered upon a new crisis of his career. It does not appear that the future destinies of Samaria and Jerusalem were revealed to Elijah, nor the fate of the surrounding nations as seen by Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Daniel. He was not called to foretell the retribution which would surely be inflicted on degenerate and idolatrous nations, nor even to declare those impressive truths which should instruct all future generations. He therefore does not soar in his dreary solitude to those lofty regions of thought which marked the meditations of Moses. He is not a man of genius, he is no poet, he has no eloquence or learning, he commits no precious truths to writing for the instruction of distant generations. He is a man of intensely earnest convictions, gifted with extraordinary powers resulting from that peculiar combination of physical and spiritual qualities known as the prophetic temperament. The instruments of the divine will on earth are selected with unerring judgment. Elijah was sent by the Almighty to deliver special messages of reproof and correction to wicked rulers. He was a reformer. But his character was august, his person was weird and remarkable. His words were earnest and delivered with an indomitable courage, a terrific force. He was just the man to make a strong impression on a superstitious and weak king. But he had done more than that. He had roused a whole nation from their foul debasement, and left them quaking in terror before their offended deity. But the phase of exaltation and potent energy had passed for the time, and we now see him faint and despondent, yet with the sure instinct of mighty spiritual natures, seeking recuperation in solitary companionship with the all-present Spirit. We do not know how long Elijah remained in his dismal cavern; long enough, however, to recover his physical energies and his moral courage. As he wanders to and fro amid the hoary rocks and impenetrable solitudes of Horeb, he seeks to commune with God. He listens for some manifestation of the Deity; he is ready to do his bidding. He hears the sound of a rushing hurricane, but God is not in the wind. The mountain then is shaken by a fearful earthquake, but Jehovah is not in the earthquake. Again the mountain seems to flash with fire, but the signs he seeks are not in the fire. At last, after the uproar of contending physical forces had died away, in the profound silence of the solitude he hears the whisper of a still small voice in gentle accents, and by this voice in the soul Jehovah speaks. "What doest thou here, Elijah?" Was his voice reproachful? Had the prophet been told to flee? Had he acted with the courage of a man sure of divine protection? Had he not been faint-hearted when he wished to die? How does he reply to this mysterious voice? He justifies himself. Being strengthened, comforted, uplifted by the exultation of the consciousness of God's presence, Elijah feels his resilient powers again upspringing. His courage returns, his perceptions grow sharp again, the inspiration of a new line of action opens up to him. He hears the word of the Lord: "Go, return on thy way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when thou comest, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, and Jehu the son of Nimshi to be king over Israel, and Elisha the son of Shaphat to be the prophet in thy room. And it shall come to pass that him who escapeth the sword of Hazael shall Jehu destroy, and him who escapeth the sword of Jehu shall Elisha slay. Yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed the knee unto Baal." Elijah still knows that his life is in peril, but is ready nevertheless to obey his master's call. He is not designated as the power to effect the great revolution which should root out idolatry and destroy the house of Omri; but Jehu, an unscrupulous yet jealous warrior, was to found a new dynasty, and the king of Syria was to punish and afflict the 10 tribes, and Elisha was to be the mouthpiece of the Almighty in the court of kings. It would appear that Elijah did not himself anoint either the general of Benhadad or of Ahab as future kings, instruments of punishment on idolatrous Israel, but on Elisha did his mantle fall. Elisha was the son of a farmer, and according to Ewald, when Elijah selected him for his companion and servant, had just been plowing his 12 yoke of land, not of oxen, and was at work on the 12th and last. Passing by the place, Elijah, without stopping, took off his shaggy mantle of skins and cast it upon Elisha. The young man, who doubtless was familiar with the appearance of the great prophet, recognized and accepted this significant call, and without remonstrance, even as others in later days devoted themselves to a greater prophet, left all and followed the one who had chosen him. He became Elijah's constant companion and pupil and ministrant until the great man's departure. He belonged to the sons of the prophets, among whom Elijah sojourned in his latter days, a community of young men, for the most part poor, and compelled to combine manual labor with theological studies. Very few of these prophets seem to have been favored with the especial gifts or messages from God, in the sense that Samuel and Elijah were. They were teachers and preachers rather than prophets, performing duties not dissimilar to those of Franciscan friars in the Middle Ages. They were ascetics like the monks, abstaining from wines and luxuries, as Samson and the Nazarites and the Rechabites did. Religious asceticism goes back to a period that we cannot trace. After Elijah had gone from the scenes of his earthly labors, Elisha became a man of the city, and had a house in Samaria. His dress was that of ordinary life, and he was bland in manners. His nature, unlike that of Elijah, was gentle and affectionate. He became a man of great influence, and was the friend of 3 kings. Jehoshaphat consulted him in war, Joram sought his advice, and Benhadad in sickness sent to him to be healed, for he exercised miraculous powers. He cured Naaman of leprosy and performed many wonderful deeds, chiefly beneficent in character. Elisha took no part in the revolutions of the palace, but he anointed Jehu to be king over Israel, and predicted to Hazael his future elevation. His chief business was as president of a school of the prophets. His career as a prophet lasted 55 years. He lived to a good old age, and when he died was buried with great pomp as a man of rank, in favor with the court, for it was through him that Jehu subsequently reigned. During the life of Elijah, however, Elisha was his companion and coadjutor. More is said in Jewish history of Elisha than of Elijah, though the former was not so lofty and original a character as the latter. We are told that though Elisha inherited the mantle of his master, he received only 2/3 of his master's spirit. But he was regarded as a great prophet for over 50 years, even beyond the limits of Israel. Unlike Elijah, Elisha preferred the companionship of man rather than life in a desert. He fixed his residence in Samaria, and was highly honored and revered by all classes. He exercised a great influence on the king of Israel, and carried on the work which Elijah began. He was statesman as well as prophet, and the trusted adviser of the king, but his distinguished career did not begin till after Elijah had ascended to heaven. After the consecration of Elisha, there is nothing said about Elijah for some years, during which Ahab was involved in war with Benhadad, king of Damascus. After that unfortunate contest it would seem that Ahab had resigned himself to pleasure, and amused himself with his gardens at Jezreel. During this time Elijah had probably lived in retirement, but was again summoned to declare the judgment of God on Ahab for a most atrocious murder. In his desire to improve his grounds, Ahab cast his eyes on a fertile vineyard belonging to a distinguished and wealthy citizen named Naboth, which had been in the possession of his family even since the conquest. The king at first offered a large price for this vineyard, which he wished to convert into a garden of flowers, but Naboth refused to sell it for any price. "God forbid," said he, with religious scruples blended with the pride of ancestry, "that I should give to thee the inheritance of my fathers." Powerful and despotic as was the king, he knew he could not obtain this coveted vineyard except by gross injustice and an act of violence, which even he dared not commit. It would be an open violation of the Jewish constitution. By the laws of Moses, the land of the Israelites, from the conquest, were inalienable. Even if they were sold for debt, after 50 years they would return to the family. The pride of ownership in real estate was one of the peculiarities of the Hebrews until their final dispersion. After the fall of Jerusalem by Titus, personal property came to be more valued than real estate, and the Jews became money lenders and the bankers of the world. They might be oppressed and robbed, but they could hide away their treasures. A scrap of paper, they soon discovered, was enough to transfer in safety the largest sums. A Jew had only to give a letter of credit on another Jewish house, and a king could find ready money, if he gave sufficient security, for any enterprise. Thus rare jewels pledged for gold accumulated among the Hebrew merchants at an early date. Ahab, disappointed in not being able without a crime to get possession of Naboth's vineyard, abandoned himself to melancholy. In his deep chagrin he laid himself down on his bed, turned his face to the wall, and refused to eat. This seems strange to us, since he had more than enough, and there was no check in his ordinary pleasures. But covetous men are never satisfied. Ahab was miserable with all his possessions so long as Naboth was resolved to retain his paternal acres. It seems that it did not even occur to this unprincipled king that he could get possession of the coveted vineyard if he resorted to craft and violence. But his clever and unscrupulous wife came to his assistance. In her active brain she devised the mean of success. She saw only the end; she cared nothing for the means. It is probable, indeed, that Jezebel hankered even more than Ahab for a garden of flowers, yet even she dared not openly seize the vineyard. Such an outrage might have caused a rebellion. It would at least have created a great scandal, and injured her popularity, of which this artful woman was as tenacious as the Jew was of his property. Moreover, Naboth was a very influential and wealthy citizen, and had friends to support him. How could she remove the grievous eyesore? She pondered and consulted the doctors of the law, as Henry VIII. Made use of Cranmer when he wished to marry Anne Boleyn. They told her that if it could be proved that any one, however high his rank, had blasphemed God and the king, he could legally be executed, and that his property would revert to the crown. So she suborned false witnesses, who swore at the trial of Naboth, already seized for high treason, that he had blasphemed God and the king. Sentence, according to law, was passed upon the innocent man, and according to law he was stoned to death, and the vineyard, according to law, became the property of the crown. Jezebel, who had managed the whole affair, did not undertake the prosecution in her own name. As a woman, she had not the legal power. So she stole the king's ring, and sealed the indictment with the royal seal. End of section 14.